Text, redesigning without disruption.
It is now.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us bright and early on a Friday morning. We can start with quick introductions. My name is Leah Scheide. I'm the service coordinator on the UW-Knowledge-Base team. And Weizhong, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. I am the developer and system administrator, architect of knowledge-based application. Been with it for a long time. Thanks.
All right. Yeah. So today we are going to be talking about a redesign project that we have been undertaking within the UW-Madison knowledge base, and specifically what it took to make those changes happen while we already had a really large number of users in our application.
Rewind to 1999.
So first, I want to give you all a little bit of background and context on the KB service. So the KB was originally created to fill a need specifically for digital knowledge management within the Do It Help Desk. So it started as a tool for a single unit.
Culture of user engagement is nurtured from outset.
However, it started to grow relatively quickly. Departments within Do It picked up the service, and eventually other units on campus. And the KB Advisory Group was created in 2003 to provide a connection between users and the development team. So once it started having more of those group spaces. So this culture of user engagement was really there from the very beginning. And it got to a point where feature requests were really routinely implemented, sometimes very quickly. What this led to was a really robust feature set that was meeting a lot of user needs. However, some of those features were really specific to individual use cases and weren't always as useful to the majority of users. And that high-level service strategy was still pretty fluid.
Floor plan of studio apartment.
And as a result, we kind of found ourselves in a space where things were getting a little bit awkward and cluttered in terms of the actual layout and interface. So this would be like if you had a house and you just started building additions without necessarily thinking about that overall flow of the home. And if you had someone new come into that home, they might struggle to find something that was there. It was just a little bit difficult to navigate. So lots of cool stuff, just sometimes hard to find.
Text, fast forward to 2016.
So then we're going to fast forward all the way to 2016. And this is the point where the KB is now in use across campus. It's been formalized as a central campus service. But after all those years, the authoring interface had still not had any kind of major update.
Idea of a redesign.
So this was the point where we started thinking about a redesign. At this point, we engaged with the Center for User Experience. They conducted a really broad user experience discovery phase, and they handed us this huge report. It was 13 pages. I went back and counted. There were 19 high-level recommendations. That's not including all of the details that went in with those recommendations. And they were wonderful recommendations. They were really useful. The problem was that they were scoped for the entire application, and there wasn't really a clear path to how we could actually start working on this. It would have just been one thing starting another, starting another, starting another, and we would have eventually had projects starting across multiple areas of the KB, and that would have created a very high risk of disruption. So if you're thinking about this in terms of a home remodel, because anyone who knows me knows I love an analogy. So that's what we're going with here today. This would be like if you started trying to renovate your home, multiple rooms, what do you end up with? You end up with things like I have a picture here, you know, your Instant Pot sitting on a chair and cooking on a hot plate, and all your stuff is sitting out on your dining room table, and everything's kind of a mess and it's chaos and it can go on for a while. And we didn't want to create that experience for our users.
A ladder leans against a home's new addition.
The other alternative, if we had tried to go ahead and implement those recommendations that we got, which we received in 2017, would be trying to build a new application alongside the existing one. However, we would not have had any increase in capacity. So we would have been trying to construct this new application while still maintaining the existing application. And that really did not feel feasible to us. So at this point, the project just kind of stalled and we decided to move on to other needs.
Text 2021, a new strategy forms.
So then we jump ahead to 2021. At this point, we had just wrapped up a pretty major project, and we did have capacity again to turn our attention back to this idea of redesigning. So this was our best opportunity to start, but we knew that we had to come up with a slightly different plan to make this feel feasible to us.
Taking a phased approach.
So we decided to take this on in a phased approach. So we identified a first phase, which was going to be just surface level visual improvements, mostly focusing on trying to reduce cognitive load. So just looking solely at things like styling within our scope. And then we were going to wait and have a second phase that we knew was going to involve more extensive interface improvements, but we would be focusing on just a single component rather than, again, starting projects all over the place.
Phase 1, visual improvements.
So this was the result of phase one, or this wasn't the result. This was our before, was those visual improvements. And we had some major goals like simplifying the color palette, increasing font sizes and spacing, and improving color contrast. So catching some accessibility issues, some usability issues that were just coming in the form of how things were styled. So this is what it looked like before. Again, this was more or less the design that it had had since 1999. Some things had changed, but again, that front level interface hadn't really changed. And this is where we got in 2022. So you can see some pretty significant styling changes. The actual underlying structure didn't change too much. There were some foundational changes that had to be made, but not many logical changes. In fact, we were really trying to avoid logical changes as much as possible. And that scope was really important to this being successful. We achieved absolutely as much as we could just by changing the CSS styling.
Phase 2.
So phase one complete. We are ready for phase two. And with this, we decided to focus on a new document editing interface. So we had used existing research that we had, again, from the Center for User Experience and some other things that we had conducted, different feedback activities. And this was to us the single most important part of the application. It also is just more important functionally. I mean, creating and editing documents, as you can imagine, is one of the most important functions of the knowledge base, is how do you create that knowledge content? We also had a lot of user feedback telling us that this interface was a barrier. And especially it was sometimes really a deterrent for new users. I'll just show you, I have a little clip that I made to scroll through so you could see easily what the current edit screen looks like. So the top were those content fields, but then you scrolled to the bottom and you got down to all the settings. And this was what we specifically were hearing was intimidating for new users. They didn't always understand what these settings were. Sometimes things were hard to find. It's a lot of radio buttons and checkboxes that are just kind of staring you in the face. And if you're new to the KB, that can be hard. We also knew that it was possible to build out a second version of this interface that could temporarily live next to the existing interface, and that wouldn't require the same amount of excessive maintenance that building an entirely new application would have.
A kitchen undergoes remodeling.
So going back to that analogy, it would be the same idea that you can't just remodel a kitchen and not expect some disruptions if you remodel the existing kitchen. And there's also a lot of underlying aspects that pose limitations to what you can do if you try to remodel the existing space. Like you can't move a sink without moving the plumbing. So this method would be similar to if you could build an addition for a new kitchen in your house while still giving everyone access to the existing one. So you can really focus on creating that ideal layout and flow before you start putting in appliances and picking out your colors and things like that.
Text, the keys to success.
So now we're going to cover the factors that led to the success of this project.
Foundation of user research.
The first one, like I kind of mentioned, was this really strong foundation of user research. I know I have a lot of text on here. There are 3 particularly good quotes we got from some of the user testing we did. And again, you can see that there were multiple different rounds of user research, different activities and surveys we had conducted that also really helped. These came from many sources. These stretched out over a number of years.
2017 discovery.
So we allowed that user research to drive those primary goals, even within this smaller scope. Just a few highlights here. You can see that first quote highlighting the wealth of features, but just wanting a quick and simple way to get documents out there, again, especially for new users.
Survey.
admins who had been around for a long time saying it just sometimes took them a long time to find a feature they didn't often use. So they still wanted the feature, they just wanted it to be easier to find.
Feedback activity.
And again, people coaching new employees saying they're just overwhelmed with all of the settings, and it was leading to them sometimes making mistakes. So we really had no doubt at this point that this was indeed where we should be focusing.
Incorporating design thinking methods.
Another really big factor for us was incorporating design thinking methods. This helped us a lot in this project. So we started with a how might we exercise. We took all that user research, I had put it into a presentation. We took those pain points and we did this how might we activity. Feel free to look this up. This is a very common design thinking activity. If you haven't heard of it before, you're trying at the end to get this statement, how might we do X? And that becomes kind of your goal statement. We followed that up with a crazy eights exercise. Again, this is something you can go find examples of this all over if you search for this, very common. So it's a way to do rapid prototyping. So as a team with a few other people from outside the team who participated, we did this really rapid prototyping. You literally have like a minute per prototype. And then you can do some voting and use this to really quickly get some consensus on where you want to go.
Wireframing and preference testing.
We then moved up one more level into some wireframing in Figma. At this point, we had taken those 3 favorite layout options we identified from the rapid prototyping Crazy Eights exercise. We made those into some wireframes. They weren't excessively interactive, just enough to give the idea of how the interface was supposed to work. And we did preference testing with users. So we had them look at all 3 layout options and tell us which one they preferred. And that is what guided us towards that beginning. So at this point, development started to build the foundations of the new layout. So this is where Weizhong came in. Weizhong, do you just want to mention here what specifically you were looking for? You're on mute.
Okay. So the existing main UI in the KB admin tool, it's a grid with 5 sections. And you have the header section, the footer section, and left navigation. And in the header, actually, there's 2 sections. So somehow that new edit screen needs to fit in one of those sections. So, but it's kind of really difficult to kind of manage all the sections and screen real estate. So the first question we had to answer was, where does the new edit screen live? So we actually came up and I kind of did some experimentation and landed on the full screen model.
And you're going to see more of this as we keep going. So
Right.
that's where now we've kind of, launched on. We're still working on design. Weizhong has started with that foundational development. And we just keep iterating on the design side here. So we're getting into higher and higher fidelity prototypes. So at this point, we got into the highest fidelity prototype that we did in Figma and started doing usability testing. So formal user interviews where we were asking people to complete tasks in the new interface, but just all in Figma. And when I say this was high fidelity, it was pretty high fidelity. For those who aren't familiar with Figma, these are different frames of the interface. This is so you can create those interactions. So you can kind of impersonate a button click and then what comes up when someone clicks that button. So these are all the little different variations of the screen so that people could really click around and see everything that we had planned out in the design, even at a point when development-wise, these features weren't all quite in place yet. So it let us move ahead with that testing and make sure we really understood what the barriers were before Weizhong got too far into actually building them out.
Developing in parallel. UI and backend decoupling.
And this part was really important. So Weizhong, would you like to talk about that process of developing in parallel?
Yeah. Again, Leah's analogy worked perfectly for in this case because the KB actually has several thousand authors, and we have an established workflow to it. And the goal here is really not to disrupt the existing workflow, so folks can continue to create their content in the KB, continue to publish. In the meantime, we really need to we start to kind of build the new edit screen kind of transparently to them or behind the scenes. And yet the new edit screen still lives in the same ecosystem. One of the first things we need to decide was the data elements versus the UI. We needed a separation because the KB actually has over 150,000 documents, and over the years we have acquired nearly 2 million document revisions in there. So making database schema changes is a big thing, and for the success of the project, we needed to do that separation between the UI and the data elements, and that was the key for me. Otherwise, we will never finish. Because so the second thing is really the workflow enhancement. We haven't established a workflow, but as some of the feedback suggests that the workflow sometimes can be simplified and is streamlined in many cases. So while we were doing this new edit screen, we had that in mind, which you'll see later on. And then the evolving design through implementation is kind of very interesting, which I never expected that would to happen. And that is, as I build out, I saw the fidelity, high fidelity kind of designs in Figma. But I started to build out, and I realized certain things don't really quite make sense logically. Perhaps we need to move something over here, or perhaps we need to rethink about that. So that kind of really kind of drove the development. I would develop something and I would take to the team on every Wednesday when we have swarm sessions and decide, well, let's revisit this thing. So it's a constant negotiation and a feedback loop. And if the internal team doesn't have a clear answer, we would reach out to our users. So, yeah.
Yeah. And like Weizhong said, that dialogue that we had kind of ongoing between those of us who were working on the design side and Weizhong working on the architecture side was really important. I want to point out here that for one thing, it really helped at this point that designers were mostly embedded within the team. Although to point out, none of us were full-time user experience, user interface designers, at least not within the team. It was either existing team members that were taking this on as a piece of their role. And then we also had some other folks from within our sub-department who were more focused on user experience and user interface design, but weren't 100% allocated to our team. So we were pulling them in to some of these meetings at times, and they were participating in that usability testing. But we didn't have this separate design team that was there and focused on this project, but in some ways that did end up benefiting us because we were able to meet regularly and keep adjusting and tweaking. And again, make sure that we were coming towards something that was actually possible.
Taking an iterative approach.
And kind of along the same lines, is it coming up? Sorry, hold on. There it goes. Taking this iterative approach was really important too. So both from that design and development side, this let us adjust the designs to technical constraints that Weizhong was finding as he was building stuff out. This also really helped us with accessibility barriers. So we started doing accessibility testing fairly early in that development process. So doing some kind of ad hoc testing, say with VoiceOver on a Mac, just kept checking to see, are there really obvious things that we're finding that are problems so we can address them sooner rather than waiting till the end and conducting some big accessibility review and realizing that there were major problems with things that had been built, maybe months prior. So we caught some of those really early on, and that let us dedicate the time we needed to them sooner. We did do more extensive testing towards the end for those final refinements, but again, we caught quite a few things pretty early.
Tapping into user community.
And going back to that user engagement and that user community that had been there from the beginning paid off in dividends at this point in the project. It gave us an easy way to recruit users for testing. Again, we have monthly meetings where we could ask people. We also just found that when we would send out surveys and things like that, we had a really pretty good response rate. And people were always really willing to help us test, and they knew who we were. So these emails weren't coming from a stranger when we were inviting them to do usability testing. They were coming from people that they had met and had heard from before.
Opportunities for regular feedback.
And having that monthly KB advisory group meeting also meant we could get really quick, straightforward feedback from those attendees. So this is an example of a Padlet is a tool that some of you may have used before. So at the end of those KB advisory group meetings, we would sometimes just demo either the prototype that we had created or once it was getting built out, showing them the actual working version that we had. And just asking them for some quick feedback. So we could go outside of those, say, 5 user interviews we had done and make sure that, yes, we are really going down the right route. We are meeting the needs. And we also then had some people bring up things that we hadn't thought about that hadn't come up in those user interviews that we were able to start incorporating too. So that really added a lot of value.
Embracing new development approaches.
Weizhong.
Yeah, really quickly, the KB was historically heavy on the back end because when it got first started, there were just Internet Explorer out there. So if you build anything that relies on the front end, you're asking for trouble. We had departments in schools like Green Bay. They're strictly IE schools, and what do? So I really stayed away from the server side. I mean, the client side of things. Until about 2 years ago, we really had to do an autosave feature that people were looking for. So we actually developed and released the auto feature, and without much of an issue. And it's a great addition, feature to the KB editing experience. And that gave us the confidence to kind of slowly to expand to the front side of things. We kind of pushed some of the functionalities to the browser side of things. And along the way, of course, we now know a lot about how to do client-side development and front-end stuff. And we will continue to do the back-end, like the validation, in addition to the server and validation. I mean, in addition to the client-side. The client-side validation is sometimes disrupt your flow. So, and in many cases, I would allow that to happen. And when you really, really want to save something, in order to kind of preserve the data integrity, I will also do the server-side validation. Yeah.
Bringing it all together.
All right. So to bring it all together, again, first of all, knowing the users who are using this tool. So understand the people who are using this digital space was a huge benefit. And then again, that idea that we really had to move together towards the middle in terms of design and development, and having that iteration, having that constant dialogue and feedback going really served us very well. So if we take it back to that analogy, just like if you were redesigning your kitchen, you're not going to be able to make any good changes if you don't take into account those underlying factors like your existing HVAC, your ductwork, and your plumbing, and your building codes. Design can't ignore construction or development because you don't want to open up a wall and then realize that what you wanted to do just isn't possible, and you're not really going to get the changes that you wanted. Similarly, if the person who's building something for you refuses to adopt new practices, you're going to miss out on modern design improvements. So you really get that best possible end result by finding that place to meet in the middle.
Where we are now.
And now I'm going to give Weizhong a chance to show us where we ended up. We are about ready to enter our early adoption stage. So this is possibly even next week going to be opened up to users formally. So Weizhong, if you want to take over the screen share and show folks what this new interface looks like.
All right. So this is the current web screen. And the new one.
Hold on. I'm not seeing your screen yet.
Creating a new document interface opens in KnowledgeBase.
I'll stop sharing again. So you're not seeing my screen. Does anybody else?
It's showing up for Zoom here. Yep.
Yep.
Sorry. It's my interface.
Okay, cool. Nope. So as you can see, the old one requires a lot of scrolling. We did what we could, but still it's too cluttered. and the new one. And so the going back to the parallel design principle here, we actually have, you can create a new doc, and you also have to create a new doc beta. So this is the new doc beta screen. So when you clicked on the new doc beta screen, this is almost like a one-stop, a one screenshot stop, like where you can take care of all your document flow needs right here, most of it, if not all of it. So first off, it's a full screen model, and you've got, the users would have the maximized the screen real estate space, and so you have the content area that sits in the on the left side, and all the other stuff we put them in the drawers on the left, on the right. Each of the drawers you can open them up, or you can and push them back in. All of the stuff over here, and so also we tried, as we talked about, streamlining the workflow. When you are creating a brand new document, one of the features people will ask for, hey, like in the current screen, the workflow, you actually have to create a document, set it in a work in progress, and then you go back to change it for team review, and then someone can publish it. Over here, if you have sufficient privileges in the system, you can publish directly, like simple, right? And sometimes really people need to get the work done quick. So that's what it is for over here. You have a very quick way to push a document out there. So here is a document that is like an existing document. Options are different naturally. You have more options because you can publish it, you can submit for review, or once it's a review, you can revert to draft. And this is like right now we have the workflow, the terminology calls for active, inactive, work in progress, or for review. Here we use different terminology: publish, submit for review, and archive. And deleting is like moving to trash for recycling. And then we also kind of highlighted some of the features that was there, but was not apparent. For example, you can actually do a scheduled publish over here. And some other improvements we did was, we wrote a new calendar picker or time picker that's accessible. Everything is like keyboard navigation, Another thing where we did really kind of useful is you can actually take a glance of the right side navigational menu, the drawers here, and get a picture of all the things that goes with the document. For example, you can say, I want to say exclude from search. As soon as you selected that one, we've got to get this message over here that says, hey, for searchability, this document, you're hiding it from searches. And if you selected a internal site only over here, it's going to tell you the site access is internal. The same pattern goes on, and we've done a lot of improvements with the UI and all, and organization of it all. So I realize we're out of time. So this is what you see, and this is actually available. If you're KB admin, you can go to the settings tab and start using it in the beta state. You go to the document settings, and a new edit screen over here, you can say, hey, we want the new doc edit screen access. You can turn it on for your group space. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I'm just going to share our one last slide here.
Looking ahead.
And yeah, you can turn it on now. We just haven't sent out the email, but it is ready. So do feel free. I just want to quickly touch on kind of going forward. Like Weizhong mentioned, we can reuse these design patterns that we established in the new doc edit screen elsewhere in the application. So there's some quick wins that we can get just by implementing some of these drop-down menus or these new toggles or these modals, which we've already started doing elsewhere. And we also now have this vetted design and development process. So if we do decide to undertake another major portion of the application, we know we can follow this process again and hopefully see the same success that we did here. So I know we are at time. I don't know if we're allowed to hang out in the Zoom after. I'm happy to take questions, but otherwise do feel free to reach out to us if you do have any questions. I'll drop my email address in the chat if you just have a question about the process. If you ever have a question about the KB in general, that is our team inbox that you can message us at.
Thank you. Questions?
All right, thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you,
Weizhong.
Leah.
Thank
That was
you.
a great presentation. Thanks. You've got Leah's chat there and the or Leah's email there in the chat and the team email there in the chat. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to them and they'll be happy to help you out. We can probably leave this open for a little bit longer if you guys need to